It is looking pretty cloudy. It has been raining a lot this morning. I hope it holds off. G'day, I'm Roland Hearn and this is A Walk in the Garden. Today I'm headed north for about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive, and I'm seeing some friends in the town of Bundaberg. Along the way I'm going to stop and look at something that reflects on an issue that's not necessarily easy to talk about, but it does have some important lessons for us, I think, in the walk in the garden. So let's get going and talk to you soon. See all those green hills behind me over there? It's quite a beautiful sight, isn't it? That's primarily sugarcane. There's a few tree crops in amongst it as well, but it's primarily sugarcane. It's a great thrill, or it used to be when I was growing up. Even when I lived in this part of the world, a little bit further south in Maryborough, a great thrill to be able to drive out into the sugarcane areas at harvesting time and see the sugarcane fires. They were quite spectacular. Sugarcane is a pretty important crop to this part of the world. You may have heard of the Bundaberg soft drinks. They're here because of the sugarcane, the sugar that's produced in this area. 95% of the sugar grown in Australia is grown in Queensland, most of it north of here, but along the coastal strip this far south, and even as far south as just a half an hour's drive north of Brisbane, you'll find sugarcane. It has something of a troubling history in Queensland, however. I was probably maybe 9 or 10 when I first started hearing the story, and it troubled me even then. But come and I'll show you something. I'm in the small country town of Childers, and what I wanted to show you is just over here. So this is a memorial to the Kanaka people. The Kanaka people were people from the South Sea Islands, South Pacific Islands, that were brought to Australia. Some of them were offered jobs, but mostly when that was the case, the opportunities were greatly expanded. Many of them were kidnapped and brought to this part of the world to harvest sugar, and they lived here. Somewhere between 50 and 60,000 people between 1860s to the 1900s. And the tragedy of that story is, while they were called labourers and were theoretically paid, they existed as not much more than slaves. Slavery had been abolished in the British Empire by the 1830s. To trade in slaves was illegal by, I think it was 1808. Plantation owners were still looking for cheap labour, and that's where the Kanakas came in. They were brought here and in many ways treated much worse than a slave, because the plantation owners didn't invest any money apart from getting them here. They lived in very poor circumstances, and many died before they reached their mid-30s. In 1901, with the Federation of Australia, the White Australia policy was enacted, and probably 70-80% of those that were still here were sent back to the South Sea Island, when many of them had been born here and grown here, and this was the only part of life that they understood. This was their only context for life. So they were sent back to the islands. There's a small group of people that remained, and against all odds, they established themselves, and their descendants live in this part of the world even still, and it is a great credit to them. Australia's South Pacific people are a people group within Australia, and many of them were here in this part of the world. The story and its tragedies is a tremendous one. There are buildings and walls through this area that were built by the Kanakas, and so their presence is still very much felt here. But this memorial that you have seen here in Childers is a way of trying to represent some form of dignity back to a group of people that were marginalised and abused and used and pretty much forgotten. We don't like to tell this story. It is Queensland's slave trade, for all intents and purposes. The story is troubling. How a person can own another person is beyond most of our understanding. How they can treat them so brutally is hard to fathom in our day and age. Who knows how most of us would have dealt or felt about that situation if we lived in that context. But regardless, the whole idea of slavery rested on one foundational principle, and that is the idea that a person was not a human. A person that was a slave was no longer human. They were less than human. And maybe because of race reasons or because of the product of military action, this person was now worthless as a human being. Their only value was their productivity. The deeply disturbing thing in that story is we know that when you take away the value of any human being, you have effectively attacked the value of all human beings. We are all either incredibly valuable or our worth is at least mitigated. So being in this part of the world and thinking about that story and looking again at some of the stories, it's been troubling to me. It's certainly stirring that those that remained have made a great life for themselves, and the things that they achieved while they were engaged in those activities is quite astounding to me. But it reminds me that in truth, our worth is not centered in our productivity. It's not centered in our circumstances. It's not even centered in the way other people describe us. Our worth is centered in love. Love communicates to us our worth, and when we are loving each other, we are communicating worth to another. But it is the idea that we are loved by God that transcends any person's opinion, and it empowers us to seek to right wrongs and bring justice and bring freedom wherever we are able. Looking back in history can give us some objectivity, and maybe it helps us to escape the pain a little bit. But the truth is, wherever we are in the world, where people are devalued because of their context, whether it be or their race, religion, politics, whatever system might be used to devalue a person, that system is wrong. God's love says to us that at the foundational level, beyond any circumstance, we are in fact valuable. And as we allow the love of God to transform our lives, it makes it possible for us to bring love, grace, justice, honor, and dignity into the lives of all we meet. And that is a great and grand project. This is a kind of a different emphasis for a walk in the garden. But it does say that when we understand that love and worth are two sides of the same coin, we must recognize if we are the recipients of love and we understand that we are valuable, we have an absolute responsibility to address inequity and injustice. And where we allow anecdotes, observations, stories to become the fabric around which another group of people are marginalised, we need to address that, and we need to put an end to that, and we need to think about the value of other people in ways that reflect their worth to them. Well, thank you for being on the road with me today. Next week, I'm going to be even a little bit further away, so stay tuned for that. And I'll see you there as you keep on walking in your garden. See you later.